This talk is about creativity. There is a TED talk by Ken Robinson. It's called Do Schools Kill Creativity? Over the last 5 years, I think I've probably watched it about 20 times. I think it's actually the most watched TED talk of all time. And in it, Ken Robinson identifies that creativity should be as important as literacy in our schools. He also argues that creativity is our best hope to meet a future which we cannot foresee. When I was asked to do this TED talk, I couldn't think of anything better to say than what Ken said. I do think that Ken Robinson would make a great Prime Minister. I'd actually like to publicly declare my love for Ken Robinson. The best bit of advice you might get from my talk, if you haven't watched his talk, is to watch his talk. Do you know that when you get asked to do a TED talk, you get sent 11 of the best TED talks to watch? I think someone at TEDxHQ must have thought, it's a really good way to settle the nerves of future speakers. Somebody could have thought, let's send them, 11 of the biggest blunders in TED history, because that might kind of relax them or give them a bit of confidence. But no, you basically get sent a set of rules about how to make your talk completely perfect. By the time I'd watched 11 incredible TED Talks, I just thought, I don't have anything to say. And why on earth did I agree to do this anyway? But the other thing it made me realise is that actually I've never actually watched a TED Talk from start to finish, apart from Ken Robinson's one. It's not because the speakers aren't incredible or the ideas aren't amazing, but I just sometimes find myself getting a bit overwhelmed by the sheer wealth of good ideas. At latest count, I think there are 93,000 TED Talks and TEDx Talks online. That's 93,000 good ideas worth spreading to make the world a better place. Is anybody else wondering why the world isn't a better place? Why more of the world's problems haven't been fixed or solved, or things haven't changed more? Even when I think about King Ken and his awesome talk, I look at the education system in the UK and see it going in exactly the opposite direction to what Ken suggests, with creativity becoming less valued by our school system rather than more. Why? When there is such a beautifully expressed, incredible argument there that's been watched nearly 50 million times, why does our school system and those who design it not seem to be changing? I think part of the issue is that giving talks, including TED, is part of what I would describe as a wider watching and listening culture. I imagine that TED Utopia is a place where good ideas get spread to everyone. But how many of these good ideas actually get implemented by those of us who listen to them? How many of us actually change the way we think, or more importantly, how we act, because of what we hear or read? I think there's an unquestioned principle in our society that people learn most by listening and reading. But do we? This assumption means that our society systematically privileges listening and reading as our preferred approach to learning. Our education system is largely based on this approach, with children predominantly expected to sit and listen. Our companies actually also operate on this approach, with most work carried out by some form of instruction, and our governments also work like this, with public policy developed through the analysis of data and reports. But the strange thing is I think most of us, as individual human beings, do not change to the point where we take action unless we undergo an experience. Try asking your friends when their lives have been changed. I think it's less common for people to tell you about a talk that they've listened to or a book that they've read than an experience they've had, by meeting somebody, by going somewhere, by trying something new. Why is this? I think it's because when we practically try something, we take more of a personal risk than when we listen or read. When we experience something, we do not just sort of intellectually involve ourselves, but we emotionally, physically, and socially involve ourselves. And in this more visceral state, we're more likely to open ourselves up to the possibility of change. We're more likely to carry that experience forwards, to learn through doing. But somehow the systems we've developed in our schools, our organisations, and our governments privilege listening and reading above a culture of learning through doing. But could a culture of learning through doing be any better? I think it's interesting to look at times when a family or a community or a country go through some kind of crisis, because it's often in these moments that people are extraordinary. My guess is that this is not just because people have a primal instinct to want to put things right in a crisis. It's also because difficult situations compel us to take action, to do. And the result is that we take more risks and we do all kinds of things practically that we probably would not have attempted had it not been for the crisis. You can see this kind of doing and risk-taking happening on a massive scale during and after World War II. For example, because of the challenges during the conflict, the Emergency Medical Service was established and run by government to help provide free medical care to people in bomb-blasted communities. This helped people, including government, ministers, experience the benefits of this healthcare system for all. And after the war, free healthcare for all was established as the norm, the NHS. And because people believed it was a good thing, because they'd experienced it. And as a result, a new idea was not just created, but delivered on a massive scale, a health system which has since been envied around the world. Can you imagine such an extraordinary idea that changes the lives of millions of people, that changes the fabric of our country, being developed and delivered through our current systems, which are not about learning through doing? I'm not suggesting that we have to experience some kind of trauma in order to get stuff done, simply that we practically test more ideas. And I'm also not saying anything that anybody in this room doesn't already know, because when we were small, like about this big, we all knew this, because this is how we lived. Most of the useful things we learnt when we were a toddler that we do today, speaking, moving or walking, eating, being able to represent something through scribbling, and so on, we learnt through doing. We didn't read a book about reading, and as a consequence, learn how to read. At the heart of our learning experience as a toddler was doing things instinctively and often failing to achieve the thing we were trying to do. But through learning by trying stuff, we would continue to refine the way we did something. I believe we display a very pure form of human creativity when we are that young. We're prepared to try anything in order to explore and learn new stuff. But as we get older, more of our adult systems kick into action, which tends to make us fearful of making mistakes. This suppresses our creative instincts. Even the idea of our own creativity becomes confused, to the point where I think people tend to think about creativity as a skill that you learn, like painting or singing. For me, creativity just means that you're prepared to take a risk, to try and make something and do something when you're not quite sure what will happen next. And our creativity is free. It's on tap. Like the right to life and the right to be free, we all have the right to be creative. But instead of exercising and enjoying our creativity, we've learned to sit in auditoriums like this. Instead of TED Talks, perhaps we should have TED Actions, in which we come together to test our ideas, in which we all get to do stuff, to learn through doing. So the idea I want to share with you today is not an idea. It's just a practical suggestion and a process. We should all spend less time listening to so many of other people's ideas and spend more time trying and doing stuff. Rather than think through passively listening, let's think through a creative process of doing. So how do we take a more practical approach without any crisis or trauma forcing us to? Our listening and watching culture has become so ingrained that sometimes we just need a bit of help to actually just do stuff. I'll share with you a process I have used in my work as a producer to support other people's ideas to develop. And it can apply in lots of different contexts. It's called Scratch. It's simply a creative process to develop and deliver ideas, and this is how it works. Firstly, someone has an idea. Say it's you. You start by defining your idea. It could be a massive idea, or it could be just quite a small, modest idea. And then you plan. You practically plan how to test your idea. And as part of this stage, you would assess the risks of carrying out your idea and the resources you will need, making sure that you save some of those resources for your second and your third and your fourth test. And then you would carry out a test of your idea. You would personally take a creative risk by doing a version of your idea live before you really know what it is, and other people would get to experience it. Then you would gather feedback to find out how people react to your idea. What did they experience? And then you analyze what their feedback means. You decipher it and what that means for the future of your idea. And then ideally you would take time to go away and do something else for a bit so that you can come back to your idea with a little bit more perspective. And then you revisit your idea and you further develop it and plan a new test and so on, iteratively developing a practical idea. It's not the creative process, it's just a creative process. And before you think, oh God, this is Scratch, it's some new jargon or idea I've got to get my head around, remember this is not something new to you. Remember that you use this approach, or a simplified version of this approach, literally millions of times in the first few years of your life as a toddler. As you learnt stuff, as you changed because of the responses you got from people. And through your willingness to take creative risks in your early years, you probably learned more stuff and changed more quickly than you have for the rest of your life put together. With each loop, you develop a new iteration of what you are creating. Be prepared, just one health warning, receiving feedback is almost always frustrating on some level. Feedback rarely says, wow, what an amazing idea. That's so clever. Gosh, you're so smart. Instead, feedback is usually really annoying on some level because other people see things that you can't, or they just seem to be looking at something else entirely. But either way, their feedback provides you with more information to help you reflect on your idea. It's likely to disrupt your thinking, but that's the point. It helps you see your idea through somebody else's eyes. It helps you see it through them. Lots of people fed into the development of this talk, and I would like to thank them for their feedback, even though it was quite annoying. So when I was growing up, I consistently felt inadequate in a system which graded intelligence like a product. I felt I had a missing chip. Like millions of other children around the country, I struggled to absorb large quantities of information and regurgitate it to order. The system didn't only make me feel insufficient, it meant I felt bored. And despite a current generation of wonderful teachers, the current system is doing the same to hundreds of thousands of young people every year. But imagine if our schools adopted creative learning principles that look something more like this. Learning could be a practical adventure. Rather than force children into subject-specific disciplines, a practical approach could help young people to develop more ways to think, not just analytically, but laterally and divergently, not just critically, but entrepreneurially and strategically. Every day could be about doing and learning rather than thinking about how not to be wrong. And every day could increase our sense of our involvement as young people, our purpose and our agency. What if we went the whole hog and used a creative process like this in the way that our government operates? How would that look? Rather than a group of policy researchers evaluating data in order to change the lives of people they have never met and probably never will, every day could be about practically testing policy ideas by working with members of the public to feed back and to help shape those policy ideas. And at a time when divisions between different communities, ideologies and approaches threaten to dangerously divide us, I would argue that more than ever, we need to creatively and practically work together, to understand each other and to invent our future together, rather than one group of people present another group of people with solutions. Because it is through the very process of doing, the creative process of making it up as we go along, from which we have so much to gain, individually and collectively. Of course, there's huge value in listening and reading and watching, but we must seek to balance this with doing and testing and creatively learning. So my simple practical suggestion is to watch less and do more. And as we finish this TED Talk, let's turn it into a TED action. I'm going to ask you, you've already met each other, but to turn to the person next to you and share with them an idea that you would like to test, whether it's in your work life, your family life, your home life, and just do that for 30 seconds, and then the other person can share their thought and their idea that they would like to test. You have 1 minute, and it starts now. Okay, ladies and gents, thank you very much. Thank you for taking part in that experiment. I encourage you to pursue those ideas, and maybe if you've just heard somebody's idea and that's really excited you, then maybe get their number in the break and phone them up in 3 weeks' time and check they've done it. Thanks very much.